At this very moment, as you're sitting here, an invisible force is reshaping the dollar amount of absolutely everything in your life. That next fill-up at the pump, your upcoming trip to the supermarket, the utility statement that's about to arrive at your door within the next few weeks. You haven't noticed yet, but the calculation has already been completed. The figure is already shifting upward. And it begins not in our nation's capital, not in the financial district of New York, but inside an operations center in Alberta, Canada, where someone just reduced a critical valve by 40%. This isn't speculation about what might happen. This isn't some doomsday projection. This is the reality unfolding right this second in live time. And before the majority of Americans grasp the domino effect, it will have already invaded their household expenses. Stick with me through these next several minutes because the information I'm about to reveal will fundamentally alter how you interpret every single cost you see for the remainder of this entire year. If you haven't yet hit subscribe on Daily Brief, this is your moment because this situation is literally reaching into your home. Let me take you back to where this started. Let me rewind to that press briefing in Ottawa where Prime Minister Mark Carney approached the microphone and, using the calculated, precise terminology of someone who used to run a central bank, made an announcement that energy specialists are already drawing parallels to the 1973 Arab oil embargo. There was no shouting. There were no threats issued. He simply declared that Canada was activating Emergency Export Reduction Authority under the Canada Energy Security Act, effective in less than 48 hours, to impose an immediate 40% reduction in crude oil shipments flowing to the United States. 4 million barrels every single day moving southward, now slashed to 2.4 million in an instant. Pipeline companies received orders to adjust their flow rates. The oil that would no longer be traveling to American refining facilities, 1.6 million barrels each day, was immediately rerouted to Asia through the Trans Mountain Pipeline, leading to British Columbia's Pacific Coast terminals, to Europe through Atlantic shipping channels. Canada didn't completely close the valve. They dialed it down by exactly 40%, which, as you're going to comprehend shortly, is strategically more damaging. Because a total embargo would immediately trigger international emergency protocols, would activate the International Energy Agency's emergency sharing mechanisms, would invite worldwide intervention. But a precisely calibrated 40% reduction, it exists in a legal gray area where no international organization has authority to reverse it. It's a sovereign energy policy choice, perfectly calculated, perfectly lawful, and perfectly catastrophic. To comprehend why this particular moment carries the weight that it does, you need to grasp the actual numbers. And these numbers are absolutely staggering in scale. Canada isn't merely America's largest oil supplier. It is America's largest oil supplier by such a massive margin that it makes every other source appear insignificant. According to the official data from the United States Energy Information Administration, Canada represents roughly 60% of all crude oil that gets imported into the United States. That translates to approximately 4 million barrels flowing southward every single day through the Enbridge mainline system, the Keystone pipeline network, the Express pipeline infrastructure, and multiple smaller conduits feeding directly into the industrial core of America. The Midwest region, the northern tier states, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Minnesota, Montana. Now here's the component that transforms a supply disruption into an engineering catastrophe of massive proportions. Those refining facilities aren't simply purchasing Canadian crude because it happens to be geographically convenient. They are physically, mechanically, chemically engineered specifically to process it. The heavy bitumen-derived crude that gets extracted from the Alberta oil sands, thick, sulfur-rich, incredibly dense, requires specific catalytic cracking units, specific coking systems, specific desulfurization processors. This equipment was designed, calibrated, and constructed over multiple decades to handle one specific product from one specific geographic source. You cannot simply swap in light sweet crude from Texas or Saudi Arabia and achieve the same output results. The chemistry fundamentally doesn't work. The equipment fundamentally doesn't work. As gas buddy analyst Patrick DeHaan articulated in a widely referenced analysis, it's comparable to asking someone with a diesel-powered truck to suddenly fill up with regular gasoline instead. The machine simply isn't designed for that fuel. And it's not just one isolated refinery facing this problem. There are 15 to 20 major United States refinery facilities heavily dependent on Canadian heavy crude supply. The Whiting Refinery, located in Indiana, the largest in the entire Midwest region, processing 440,000 barrels every single day, operates almost exclusively on Canadian oil. The Toledo Refinery in Ohio, the Detroit Refining Complex in Michigan, the Pine Bend Refinery in Minnesota, which processes more Canadian crude than any other single facility anywhere in the country. Retooling a single major refining facility costs somewhere between $2 and $5 billion and requires 3 to 5 years to complete. To retool all of them would require somewhere between $30 and $100 billion before a single barrel of alternative crude oil ever gets processed through them. Stop right here. Reread that figure carefully. $30 to $100 billion and 3 to 5 years minimum. That is the wall that America just slammed into at full speed. America and Canada didn't just construct a trading relationship around oil resources. They built a physical infrastructure marriage, shared pipeline networks, matched refinery configurations, synchronized production schedules, co-designed processing chemistry, decades upon decades of interdependence engineered directly into concrete and steel that cannot be dismantled by executive order. And right now it's coming apart. This didn't materialize in a vacuum of silence. This is what decades of diplomatic warnings look like when they finally get disregarded one time too many. Carney's government had been sending signals for months through every available diplomatic channel that energy was the absolute red line, that touching Canada's core industries would trigger an energy response. The warning was delivered clearly. It was received and acknowledged, and it was completely ignored. But here's the deeper narrative, and this is the component that almost nobody in the American media is framing in the proper context. 3 years ago, this weapon didn't even exist as an option. Canada had nowhere else to sell its oil production. If Ottawa had cut exports to the United States back then, it would have been severing its own revenue stream with absolutely no alternative buyers available. The leverage was entirely in Washington's hands. But then the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion came fully online in May of 2024. According to detailed reporting from the Asia-Pacific Foundation of Canada, TMX dramatically boosted Canada's West Coast pipeline capacity from 300,000 barrels per day all the way up to 890,000. Within the very first month of operational status, the combined pipeline systems were already running at 81% capacity utilization. Between May of 2024 and September of 2025, crude oil exports flowing to Indo-Pacific markets jumped from virtually zero to an average of $571 million per month. China became Canada's second largest oil customer practically overnight. Japan, South Korea, Singapore, India, all aggressively competing for long-term contracts. Carney himself publicly acknowledged the transformation, stating, as reported by multiple Canadian media outlets, over 95% of all our energy exports went to the States previously. This tight interdependence, once a strength, has now become a weakness. Canada built the exit route, and then they actually used it. Within 48 hours of the export reduction order being issued, the chain reaction started exactly where the physics and economics dictated it absolutely would. Right at the refinery level. The Whiting Refinery in Indiana slashed throughput down to 55% capacity. Toledo, Ohio, identical story unfolding. Detroit, Michigan, same exact story. Pine Bend, Minnesota, same exact story playing out. Workers sent home on rotating furloughs. Maintenance shutdowns accelerated ahead of schedule. Production lines running at barely half capacity across the entire industrial Midwest region. And a refinery operating at 55% doesn't just produce less gasoline for your car, it produces less of absolutely everything. Diesel fuel, jet fuel, heating oil, Petrochemical feedstocks. Every single product derived from a barrel of crude oil is now in drastically shorter supply. Shorter supply automatically means higher prices on absolutely everything. The gas pump is where most people notice the impact first and most immediately. Wholesale gasoline prices spiked within just days of the announcement being made. The national average, which had been hovering comfortably around $3.50 per gallon, started its relentless climb toward $5.50, towards $6, towards $6.50. In the Midwest, the geographic region most dependent on Canadian crude supply, prices pushed past $6.50 and headed rapidly towards $7.50 in Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, and Illinois. But here's what most people still aren't connecting in their minds yet. The gas pump is the crisis you can see with your own eyes. Diesel is the crisis you feel in the price of literally everything that was delivered to you by a truck. And in America, absolutely everything is delivered by a truck at some point. Diesel prices spiked right alongside gasoline prices. And diesel is the actual fuel that powers the entire American economy at its foundation. Every long-haul truck on the highway, every freight train locomotive, every delivery van, every construction vehicle, every agricultural tractor working the fields. When diesel prices surged upward dramatically, trucking companies didn't absorb the cost increase themselves. Their profit margins run 3 to 5% in a good year. They imposed emergency fuel surcharge fees 25 to 40% above normal rates. The cost to ship a single truckload of goods coast to coast jumped from roughly $5,500 to $7,500, even $8,000 for some routes. The milk in your refrigerator right now was transported on a diesel truck. The bread sitting on your counter was transported on a diesel truck. The clothes your kid is wearing right now were transported on a diesel truck at multiple points. And diesel just got 40% more expensive overnight, which means everything that rides on diesel just got proportionally more expensive too. The grocery store is where the chain reaction becomes absolutely impossible to ignore any longer. Food transportation costs surged dramatically across every single category. Produce, dairy, meat, frozen goods, packaged goods. Grocery chains absorbed the initial price increases for about 7 to 10 days, buying time, desperately hoping for a diplomatic resolution. It didn't come. And then the pass-through to consumers began in earnest. The average weekly grocery bill for a family of 4 went from roughly $270 to somewhere between $330 and $360. Fresh produce was hit hardest and fastest. A gallon of milk went up 60 to 80 cents practically overnight. A dozen eggs up 40 to 55 cents. Ground beef up $1.20 to $1.50 per pound. Even bread, one of the most basic staples in the entire American diet, ticked up 30 to 40 cents per loaf. The people who feel this worst aren't sitting around watching cable news debates about trade policy theories. They're the ones standing in the cereal aisle at Walmart doing calculations on their phones, putting items back on the shelf because the cart total is already over budget. The trade war looks very different from a grocery aisle in Michigan than it does from a podium in the Rose Garden. If you heat your house with oil or natural gas, and tens of millions of Americans absolutely do, the trade war just followed you home. It's sitting on your thermostat right now. 5.5 million American households rely on heating oil as their primary heat source, concentrated heavily in the Northeast and upper Midwest regions: Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Wisconsin. Heating oil prices spiked 40 to 60% within weeks. Natural gas, partially sourced from Canada, rose 15 to 25%. A family spending $2,500 a year on heating was suddenly looking at $3,500 to $4,000. For a retired couple in Vermont living on Social Security payments, that's an extra $1,000 they don't have available. It's the conversation they're about to have at their kitchen table about whether to keep the house at 68 degrees or drop it down to 62 to save $300 before spring finally arrives. Now let's add it all up together, because Warren Buffett did exactly that calculation, and his conclusion is the single most important number in this entire story. A median American household earns about $52,000 a year, roughly $4,300 a month after taxes. The oil cut is adding between $150 and $250 in extra gas costs per month, between $240 and $360 in extra grocery costs per month, between $80 and $125 in extra heating costs per month. Combined, that's $470 to $735 in additional monthly expenses hitting families. Call it $500 a month, conservatively speaking. $500 extra a month for a family already stretched thin financially. Buffett was asked directly about the Canadian oil cut at the annual Berkshire Hathaway shareholders meeting in Omaha. He leaned into the microphone, paused for a moment, and then said something that should be quoted in every economics classroom in America. People hear oil supply cut and they think gas prices. And they're absolutely right. Gas prices are going up dramatically, but gas is just the first domino in a long line. Diesel powers every truck in America. Every truck delivers everything you buy in your life, so everything you buy costs more as a result. A 40% oil cut doesn't raise one price in isolation. It raises every price across the board. It's a tax on the entire economy that nobody voted for. Then he made it personal. A family making $52,000 a year is about to see about $500 a month disappear from their budget. To a billionaire, $500 a month is nothing. To a family in Omaha or Dayton or Tucson, $500 a month is the difference between keeping up and falling behind. That's the car payment. That's the savings for the kids' braces. That's the buffer between getting by and going into debt. And it's gone. Then came the warning every analyst should hear. When oil prices spike upward, consumer prices follow within weeks. When oil prices come back down, if they come back down, consumer prices don't follow. They stay up. Companies use the disruption as cover to reset prices higher, and those prices become the new normal baseline. So this isn't a temporary spike. For millions of American families, this is a permanent increase in the cost of being alive. He adjusted his glasses. I've been investing for 70 years. Every oil shock I've seen follows the same pattern. Prices go up fast. They come down slow, and they never come all the way back down. The families who can least afford it absorb the difference, and nobody ever writes them a check to make up for it. Within hours of Carney's announcement, Trump signed an executive order imposing 100% tariffs on all remaining Canadian imports. He called it making Canada pay the price. But here's the fundamental problem. A 100% tariff on your largest trading partner doesn't just punish them. It punishes every American business dependent on Canadian supply chains. American home builders who source 30% of their lumber from Canada watched material costs spike overnight, adding $12,000 to $18,000 to the cost of a new home. The auto industry started warning of production disruptions within weeks. The irony is brutal. The oil cut raises energy prices. The tariffs raise housing, car, and food prices. The American consumer gets hit from both directions by Canada's action and by their own government's response. Then came the executive order directing maximum domestic production, fast-track permits, suspend reviews, release strategic reserves, powerful words. Here's reality. American production already runs near record highs. New wells take 12 to 18 months minimum. The strategic reserve holds 370 million barrels, enough for 230 days. After that, America is more exposed with depleted reserves. You cannot executive order oil faster than geology allows. Trump reportedly called Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman requesting emergency increases. Both leaders listened politely and made no commitments. Why would they? Every dollar oil rises puts millions into OPEC treasuries. Higher prices are their windfall. Asking them to lower revenue was always getting one answer. The only question was how politely they'd say no. There are two paths forward. Path one, negotiation. Someone blinks. Someone admits the spiral costs Americans more than Ottawa. A deal gets made. The valve opens. Oil flows. Prices descend slowly, incompletely. Some damage stays permanent. This requires admitting the escalation was a mistake. Path 2, the spiral continues. Canada holds firm. Refineries at 55% become normal. Gas hits $8. Groceries climb another 15%. Manufacturing shuts down. Senators in hurting states choose between loyalty and survival. There is no scenario where average families don't pay significantly. The question is how long and how permanent. The people paying most are those who can least afford it. Wealthy families absorb $500 monthly without lifestyle changes. Middle class cuts back, but 60% living paycheck to paycheck have nothing left to cut. $500 extra isn't tightening belts. It's missed rent. It's choosing between gas for work or groceries for kids. It's when trade policy abstraction becomes human crisis at kitchen tables. Buffett said it simply. When prices rise from trade wars, who pays? Not politicians, not billionaires, not those who started it. The family in Omaha trying to get through the month. Canada turned the valve. Trump fired back. The price is paid now, not by governments or corporations or parties, but by every family driving to work, heating homes, buying groceries. The oil flows, just 40% less. That 40% is the difference between getting by and going under. The pipeline runs from Alberta to your kitchen table. Right now, it's running dry. Let me leave you with real questions. Can Trump's 6-month independence promise survive when production falls 7 million barrels short? What happens to coalitions when gas stays at $7 in 6 months? When prices spike this hard, who absorbs the permanent increase after headlines fade? Leave your answer below. I read everyone. If this reached you before the pump did, share it. That's how Daily Brief works. Not algorithms, the chain reaction traced to your table. Subscribe because the next domino is moving. This isn't over. This is beginning. The valve turned. Refineries slowed. Prices jumped. Now we wait for the path, negotiation, or spiral. While Washington decides, families decide. Smaller carts, fewer trips, lower thermostats. The trade war isn't in conference rooms. It's at kitchen tables where families do math they shouldn't have to. $500 monthly doesn't sound like much until it's yours. Until it tips you from stable to struggling. A valve in Alberta turned 40%, and 3 weeks later, a family in Toledo chooses between tank and fridge. That's not politics. That's human reality in millions of homes. And it gets worse before better, if it gets better. Buffett's law applies. Up fast, down slow, never all the way back. Families aren't getting refunds, just a new normal where everything costs more and paychecks stay same. Watch gas prices, watch receipts, watch bills. Those numbers tell the story real time. What happens when governments play chicken and people pay the price? This is Daily Brief. We show what's happening. You decide what it means. Facts are clear. Valve turned. Prices jumped. Your budget is the battlefield. Stay informed. Stay ahead. Share with someone who needs to know why costs jumped and aren't coming back. The pipeline runs to your kitchen table. Right now it's 40% dry.